the US government appears to have lost some trust in the Trudeau administration. Why do Asian organized crime figures have such access to Canada's political class? I don't think it's just about Mr. Trudeau. This is pretty broad, as I understand it, across Canada's political class, but it points to the problems that I've been exposing. And, you and I have had the conversations, like, it doesn't make sense. Why are some very clear cases not being cracked down on or falling apart? And I was interested to learn that people in law enforcement are asking those same questions. And more importantly, people in American law enforcement are asking those questions of people in Canadian law enforcement. And that gets to the fentanyl issue and the Trump threats.
The illustrious, world-famous gallivanter, writer, investigative journalist extraordinaire, Sam Cooper. How you doing, my brother?
Oh, I'm good. Really busy these days. Super
yeah, dude, we were just talking about before we started. I'm so happy to see you everywhere, man. Like, I'm so happy to see your work just under like an international spotlight. Literally every day I go on the internet, there's 5 new Sam Cooper interviews, 100 clips of Sam Cooper, and it's amazing, man. Like, it's incredible to watch. I mean, I think through this Trump Trudeau controversy, your work has garnered a lot of attention because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out exactly why Trump and his administration are targeting Canada in the way that they are. And lo and behold, there's the Bureau just waiting to be found.
Like you say, a book was written and you dove into it, and now a lot of other people, including people in capitals around the world with official titles, are really digging into the book. And yeah, it has become really front and center of a major issue for Canada right now.
Well, dude, you're a living testament to, like, if you know right from wrong and you have the wherewithal to write it down, that eventually the truth comes to light and people will find it, right?
I like to believe so. It doesn't feel like it every day, but some are, there's good days. Yeah, for sure.
Well, Sam, I'm glad you're having a good time, my man. I'm really happy I grabbed you early because I don't know if these podcasts would be happening otherwise at this point.
There's a lineup. Yeah. There's a lineup.
So today, I really want to dive into the fentanyl issue and, Trump's targeting Canada specifically, because there's so much more to this story. I wrote an essay about it recently titled The Trump Effect, Exposing Trudeau and Canadian Ineptitude. That's gathered a lot of attention as well. And I really want to explore this more because you're the expert here. And you know so much more than most people, both on the Canadian and American side. So let's open up by talking about the relationship between Canadian and American law enforcement agencies and the realization by American law enforcement agencies that Justin Trudeau was in very close proximity to organized crime groups that they're targeting. Can you kind of open up that story and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. People reached out to me, that I've known for years in some cases, in Canada and the United States, as the Trump tariff issue hit global headlines and people were questioning, how the hell can Canada be put in the same category as Mexico? No one questions that Mexico's borders and the cartels there are causing a lot of problems for the United States. But because President Trump or Hurricane Donald says some wild things, and some of them turn out not to be very accurate, to say the least, because he's accusing Canada of playing a major role in fentanyl production, a lot of people of low to mid information quality in their lives thought this was just another Trump, whopper. And, as my book showed and my reporting, that you've helped promote over the last year, has told high information people around the world, including hedge fund managers, including people that as I say, that have money on the line, so they don't like to get the geopolitics or the facts wrong. My work has shown that Canada has become, strangely, a fentanyl production and export country in the world. So that's the first fact that no one can avoid. We're a G7, or we thought of ourselves as a G7 nation, and we're a fentanyl exporter. So how did that happen? And people thought that it would be good for Canadians, if we do have an election, to know whether Mr. Trump's, very aggressive threats have anything to them. And so they came to me and said, Trump is probably, the worst diplomat in the world. And he's not trying to be one. He's trying to be threatening and get his way for the American people. But they said he's not wrong when he's saying that Canada is a major producer of fentanyl and it's threatening the United States, its national security, except, essentially. And so in these conversations, excuse me, it came up that people are very aware that, as we've talked about and as I've reported about, anyone with deep knowledge of RCMP investigations and Chinese interference networks can see that Justin Trudeau is constantly meeting with people that you could read about, a person beside him rolling dumplings in Toronto at a so-called Cash for Access meeting, subject of a money laundering massive case in New Zealand, or someone out in BC at a similar meeting, being subject of the largest ever RCMP money laundering investigation, in Canadian history. And so what these people said was that I had never heard this directly about Trudeau. They said the RCMP in surveillance has had concerns that Mr. Trudeau is seen beside high-level Asian organized crime figures. And I'll paraphrase a quote that one person that couldn't be named, but extremely, credible, said that this is deeply concerning and was openly discussed in multiple RCMP units, the problems with Mr. Trudeau being at these fundraisers with the high-level Asian organized crime having access to him and his staff. So that I felt, and others did, important to report that the US government appears to have lost some trust in the Trudeau administration. Why do Asian organized crime figures have such access to Canada's political class? I don't think it's just about Mr. Trudeau. This is pretty broad, as I understand it, across Canada's political class, but it points to the problems that I've been exposing. And, you and I have had the conversations, like, it doesn't make sense. Why are some very clear cases not being cracked down on or falling apart? And I was interested to learn that people in law enforcement are asking those same questions. And more importantly, people in American law enforcement are asking those questions of people in Canadian law enforcement. And that gets to the fentanyl issue and the Trump threats. I was told that, explosive cases such as RCMP and, Homeland Security, who's responsible for borders, would have meetings with Canada Border Services Agency officials and, the Homeland Security people who have access to military grade intelligence and the most sensitive intelligence available to law enforcement in the world. So they can tap a lot of people everywhere. They would come up to quietly, to their RCMP counterparts and say, we have a concern with this Canada border official. Don't bring him to our next joint meeting. And so as I was told, this would be put up the chain and said official would turn up to the meeting. And the Americans just got, eventually disgusted and lost trust and have stopped having those sensitive intelligence sharing meetings. And this goes, it goes into the RCMP. It goes into Canada Border Services. It goes into, as it's reflected to me, distrust of the political class. So we're talking high officials in the Trudeau government. apparently are not very respected or trusted by the United States. And so that was the that was the meaning of that story, that when Trump is saying you've got a problem and we need a fentanyl czar, and we need to get together in law enforcement, my reporting is indicating that's not just an idle story, right? This is supported by American law enforcement sources and Canadian sources. And I'll end by saying this. After I broke that story, which was explosive, Brad West, who I think we've talked about before, a Vancouver area mayor who had met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken in 2023 under a different administration and had talked about the American government's concerns with Canada being a fentanyl producer and Canada not being able to crack down, and the money laundering that facilitates it, and just all amounts of problems in Canada. Mayor West came back to me with more information and said he had heard the same things from American law enforcement, that they have concerns of why the heck does high-level Asian crime have this access to Canada's political class. So powerful corroboration and confirmation of my source story. And he added again, Mayor West could share more from Antony Blinken, that Antony Blinken had told Mayor West American intelligence and law enforcement is holding back because they're losing faith in Canada's ability to prosecute what Mayor West called industrial scale fentanyl, production and, rampant organized crime in Canada. So without rambling further, powerful confirmations that Canada is a concern. And whatever's happening in Ottawa now, I still hear a lot of, denials from the usual suspects that, Canada isn't the problem here, but clearly it is. And I just would finish by saying, I've always felt that this is about China's, first of all, America and China are very close to war. Not many people realize it, but it's starting to surface a bit more.
Yeah.
So that is a concern beyond fentanyl, beyond corruption. Does Canada have the military capacity, the police capacity, the government institutions to push back against China's subtle interference that could lead to actual, war-like conditions in the Arctic? That's what's going on underneath all this unprecedented rattle that's happening to Canada right now.
And, the obvious concern, too, is if the war were to ever turn hot, can the United States count on Canada as an ally, or are we going to be a Sweden and allow, Chinese military to pass through our territory into the United States? Like that's a real concern. That's a real fear, and for people wondering why I'm referencing Sweden here, in World War II, Sweden was a neutral country. They would not allow the Western allies to use their territory for any reasons, but they allowed the Nazis to pass through because they were afraid. And Canada could find itself in a very similar situation. And if that were the case, then we run into a very real scenario of finding American tanks rolling down our streets one morning, right?
Well, we're seeing mixed signals, right? We will have a Canadian Navy frigate, in support in the Taiwan Strait, and that will show a good sign. But then, a few years ago, we'll have Chinese military or police training in Canada, sending a crazy mixed signal to U.S. military and enforcement and intelligence. And by the same token, it's a capacity issue. So if a balloon from China spying on North America enters our territory, we don't have the capacity, right? We do not have the capacity to handle that. The U.S. will have to send scrambled jets up to handle that. So that's just indicating, even if we're all politically, on side with our historic allies in the States, we can't handle, we simply can't handle an attack or an incursion from Russia or China in the north, which the potential of that is growing by the day, right? And there are those trust issues. People in the States, as we've talked about a lot before, are rightly asking,
Yeah.
just like the issue of organized crime figures from China having access to Canada's political class, that goes across, our institutions. People in Washington and the Pentagon, they're scratching their heads and have been for a long time. And I think, probably they're not scratching their heads. Probably they have some information that I'm not privy to that gives them a lot more concern.
Well, that's where I was going to go with this, because, like what you've reported is verifiable fact. And these are documents that you have either attained through freedom of information or, secretly behind the scenes from insiders. But the point that I'm getting to here is what you know and what you've reported is scary enough, but you're only receiving whatever leaks out from these agencies. There's a ton that you don't know and that Canadians don't know, right?
Yeah, I got sensitive documents, but without a doubt, and I was aware of it, the people that risked a lot to meet with me and to provide some information certainly had more sensitive information, inclusive of American agencies sharing information with Canada at a high level, which, as we've talked about, was essentially buried, whitewashed, or covered up in the Hogue Commission. I would see little hints of, signals intelligence here, confirmation of a transaction there. And then you'd have, like the current new CSIS director up there under his former position, kind of giving like a cute one sentence answer. Oh, I'm aware of that, with no more information coming out. So yeah, I have some information even I can't say because, I've understood it would not probably be helpful, for Canada or the United States or Taiwan, etc. But I know that there's a lot more that I was not privy to, that people that I met with are privy to, and that supported their reasons for coming to the expert, coming to me.
Absolutely. And that's the real fear, right? Is that there are things that you have that you can't share for a litany of reasons, right? National security interests, or just, not disappearing in the middle of the night, that sort of deal. And that's the real scary part here, is that this isn't just a US aid story, where Trump is removing the funding from a CIA cutout that has been an instrument of American hegemony for, since John F. Kennedy, right? This is something that is much more sinister, much darker, and is detrimental to the sovereignty of our country that just so happens to border the greatest power the world has ever known. And that's where we find ourselves now. You see, I was talking to...
I would jump in on your point. Yeah. The issues with like America, intelligence being disrupted, whatever you think of that, in their forward posture is a huge difference between what was told to me about our defensive structures and postures and our government being eroded, right? So there's a big difference. I don't need to get into that philosophical debate too much, but the people that risk a career to tell me something are doing it because they knew a few years ago that Canada's state was kind of hanging by threads.
Yeah.
And what do we see now? Everyone can see the threads pretty much.
And it's strange because we can all see it now.
Yeah.
And largely thanks to your work. I know I kiss your ass a lot when we do these episodes, but I'm enthralled by the level of change and actually inspired by what you've done, because you're one guy. And you could have, as we've discussed in the past, you could have had a corner office at any publication you chose and been, a staff writer or an editor and just towed the line. But you made this decision. You chose to do this. And I I think what you've done is absolutely incredible. And now we are looking at a scenario where, I mean, we talked about this last time, but will Canada even exist in 3 to 5 years? Are we still going to be a country? Will it exist as it does today? And it's because this corruption in our government is so transparent and so out in the open now, yet nobody in our government, and that's on both sides of the aisle, are willing to outright and openly address it. I would say even Trump is hesitant to address this publicly, because we know, you and I, knowing the stuff that we know, myself largely because of you and because I read the Bureau every day, but we know that a lot of what's driving Trump's tariff ultimatum with Canada is China. However, he's not coming right out and saying it. I guess that's his way of being diplomatic, is not kind of revealing the whole elephant at once. But we know that that's the driver, is China. We know that the fentanyl, the open borders, it all has to do with Chinese interference in the Canadian bureaucracy, and that's what Trump is attacking. Yet he's not saying it outright. So this is something that we can all see. We can all see that the emperor has no clothes. Yet Sam Cooper seems to be the only one pointing it out, right?
I mean, in the statements from Rubio or President Trump about Panama, they've been a lot more clear that we cannot have, I believe they probably even pointed to Li Ka-shing and Hutchison Whampoa, which we have talked about at length. And they've said we can't have these Hong Kong tycoons, which, by the way, if people read the Bureau this summer or listened to some of our conversations, I was pointing to Panama. I was pointing to Hong Kong tycoons. And what do you know? So, yeah, the American government will be more overt, saying it's these tycoons with connections to China in Panama. In Mexico, they'll talk about the cartels. But what's not said in Mexico is that Chinese organized crime is the upstream, perhaps even director, controlling mind, or rather, financier of the cartels. They're together. And that's something else that people can go to my interview with Mayor Brad West and hear it directly from a Canadian politician saying, Democratic Biden Secretary of State Antony Blinken told me about the connection between the Chinese Communist Party, the triads, and the Latin cartels, and all the different objectives fulfilled, right? So again, people do not only have to be reading my writing or hearing my words and saying, wow, that sounds nuts. Okay, listen to a BC politician, a man of great integrity, sharing what the US government shared with him. To your point, yeah, Trump is still, I think, fentanyl is a key word because everyone knows China is cited as well. In his very first post, it was like, please attend to this issue, right? China, Mexico, Canada. So by saying fentanyl, yeah, maybe you could say there's a little bit of holdback, and the American administration is not saying, well, we have concerns that, you're getting close to being used as a bit of a proxy by our key enemy, China. But by saying fentanyl, essentially, that's what they're pointing towards.
And this is what I've gathered just through what I've seen. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Sam, but it seems to me like they're very, very careful about China interference and influence domestically, and, because, they'll use fentanyl as the code word for China, but they won't say China directly. And I think it has to do with the fact that they know that they have some problems within their own agencies, and that they would rather handle those issues quietly than to have them exposed and out in the open like they are now in Canada. Do you get the same sense?
I'm definitely getting the sense that there's no question that people in the United States and their agencies, of course, already know that their level of infiltration from China is intensive. And as we know, and they know, it's even more intensive in Canada. But look, I just reported for the Bureau last week. I was invited to a sort of a close group was briefed by a former great CIA analyst, pointing to 858 cases of espionage and how China just has this vast, both official and unofficial intelligence machine on the soil in the United States. So yeah, they're very aware that they're very targeted, and interesting things are going on that I can't quite understand with regards to TikTok, with regards to what influence, let's just say powerful Silicon Valley people have, within the US administration, what kind of calculus is going on between the US government trying to pry Russia and China apart, at a very high level, and what's going on with infiltration of US agencies by China, which is, I think, is what you're hinting towards. And I do believe, we're seeing more and more of those cases, including in the Navy. And it relates a lot to first generation Chinese Americans that are being, leveraged with sort of, pride for the motherland, even though they weren't born in the motherland.
Yeah.
One case I pointed to, I'll just mention it. It's egregious. A mother in Wisconsin who migrated to America told her Navy son he should follow through on these recruiting, missives from the Ministry of State Security because it would lead to greater wealth and, opportunities for him in the motherland. So yeah, there is a concern that the enemy is within the gates in the United States as well.
And that creates a stickier, more complex problem because you can't restrict people of a certain ancestry or racial background from joining your military if they're American or Canadian citizens. However, if their loyalties are to China and the CCP, then how do you dissect that? How do you pick that apart, right?
It's the worst situation in the world. We've talked about it before. In Australia, they've had great reports saying the Chinese Communist Party, through its just absolute, egregious activities, creates distrust within, our Western societies. It puts unfair scrutiny onto the vast majority of Asian immigrant population. And yet there's a very significant portion of people that are being leveraged with that, motherland pride, or as they egregiously say, everyone in the world is a children of the Yellow Emperor. The most racist, that is if you're a migrant, the most racist. It's just horrible. But that is putting just this incredibly sticky responsibility on employers or government officials that, the fact is, under Chinese law, you can be compelled to collect for Chinese intelligence, and they don't see a division even if you're not a citizen of China. If you're racially Chinese, they still feel that they can exploit that, which is the worst situation in the world.
Yeah, and they, for lack of a better phrase, they believe or they feel that they own you.
They do. Yeah.
And you in their eyes are an extension of their exploits and their quest for world domination. And
they call it blood loyalty, and that's really, let's just call it what it is. That's the evil of the Chinese Communist Party. It's
thoroughly evil. I had the opportunity to speak to somebody in my community recently who migrated here 30 years ago from China to Alberta. He specifically came to Alberta, and he told me that he came to Alberta because he was desperate to avoid BC because he knew the things that were happening there even back then.
Yeah.
Right. But he was telling me stories about growing up during the Cultural Revolution, because I believe he was 10 or 13 years old or 7 years, something. He was very young at the time, but he was telling me about his experiences, and, to have experienced that and to have resisted the indoctrination, because the indoctrination into the Communist Party, what they called Mao Zedong thought, especially at that time, was very, very heavy. But to have resisted it, escaped, and then, come to Canada is a huge deal. And, we talked about this before, where people are pursued by this even once they get here. And, that the gentleman that I was speaking to told me that he chose Alberta specifically because he, in his words, said Chinese are afraid of the cold, and so they won't come here. Yeah. Right. But that's the level of thinking involved to try to escape this. Right. And so now, we're at a situation where this thing is so deeply embedded in our country that, we have, like you outlined in the story that we talked about earlier, you have two law enforcement agencies. You have, the FBI, you have the FBI, the DEA in the United States, and then you have the CBSA and the RCMP in Canada, who are no longer sharing intelligence because the American agencies no longer trust the Canadian agencies with the intelligence. Yeah. I mean, it's mind-blowing, right?
It's mind-blowing. And it reminds me, we've talked before, one of my great colleagues, Iranian-Canadian journalist, shared that she was told by, a leader in the United States that they should not travel up to Canada because the FBI, knew that there were threats in Canada, and yet they didn't trust the RCMP to share that information. Yeah. So yeah, it goes across the board.
So now Canada seems to finally, at least in outer appearances, look like it's waking up, at the bureaucratic level to a certain extent. It's capitulating to Trump's demands because the Trudeau government, I think, despite all of their grandstanding and, campaign rhetoric coming from Mark Carney, they've realized that this situation we find ourselves in is very bad news if we lose America as a trading partner and if we have to go through these 25% tariffs. So they have begun to make some changes. And one of those changes is they appointed a fentanyl czar. Can you talk about who this guy is, what his background is, and if you have any real confidence that he's actually a fentanyl czar?
Yeah, his name is Kevin Brosseau, I believe, and all I know about him is from reading his resume, really. So, he was an RCMP deputy commissioner, seems to have spent a lot of time in fisheries in recent years, which, okay, that's not who I would pick for a fentanyl czar. Right. I do know that organized crime has penetrated our fisheries, but
I highly doubt he's in there, checking fish for packets of fentanyl, right?
No, I don't think so. But, interestingly, he had served as a deputy minister for national security or intelligence advisor for Trudeau. And that one, I know I'm not the only one that saw that and said, okay, he's very obviously he's had, a pretty close relationship to the Trudeau senior bureaucratic intelligence apparatus. And my very first thought is, from covering the Hogue Commission, even though, the eminent Canadian judge didn't come to strong conclusions, as we talked about, we heard enough evidence about Justin Trudeau's national security and intelligence advisors asking for changes to CSIS intelligence at the highest levels, blocking reports of intelligence coming up to Justin Trudeau that would clearly reflect negatively on Justin Trudeau's cabinet or caucus and other parties. And so to put a sharp point on it, that doesn't give me great confidence in this Mr. Brosseau, that he comes from that same, I don't know anything negative about him, but if you come from, as I say, it's all about networks. And if you're in the network that the highest level people are responsible for dropping the ball at best, obstructing CSIS at worst, around, Trudeau's knowledge of very serious things related to China, and that would include fentanyl, clearly, Yeah, I don't think he looks like a great pick, to be honest. And I've said Mayor Brad West himself has shown willingness that if called upon by a new government, if we have an election, if they read the Bureau and see how strong Mayor West has been since 2018 on fentanyl, and how Mayor West advocates that we need changes, deep changes to our prosecutorial laws, around fentanyl and transnational organized crime. And Mayor West openly, imagine a Canadian politician openly saying they know of, and they know the US government is concerned about Asian organized crime connections to Canada's political class. That's exactly the type of person that we need as a czar, and that would have the confidence of the US government. So I'm not running the show, but if I was, Mayor West would be my fentanyl czar, and he would have the trust of the Americans. And you wouldn't be seeing, I think that would go a long way to saying Canadians don't want tariffs. Canadians want Hurricane Donald to stop the rhetoric. Okay, make some strong choices and not just, kind of like doing the least to try to get by.
It looks like, just based on what I read in your report and just general human intuition, especially considering everything that we've seen from the Trudeau Liberals over the last 10 years, it just looks like more insulation to me. It looks like more padding. I mean, if he was actually serious about this, he would be, as you noted, appointing somebody from outside of his network. But again, what this looks like to me is more protectionism, because I think he knows if anybody seriously investigates this matter, it's going to lead to him and his political party eventually.
That's my concern. I mean, I've said it a number of times. I believe if there was a real commission to get to the bottom of fentanyl and money laundering, it even came up in the Hogue Commission, again, in the most minimized, basically whitewashed way. They talked about the RCMP for some reason not pursuing a money laundering case involving Chinese actors that were believed to be involved in Chinese state activities. And the excuse given by the RCMP, it came out in testimony, even though they didn't get to the bottom of anything, in the commission. The excuse was, well, the RCMP said, well, there's so many money laundering operations, they didn't see value in going after this one. I'm sorry, WTF, right? You don't want to get to the bottom of a money laundering investigation when you know that Chinese triads are the targets of U.S. government and enforcement intelligence that believes they've set up to run Western Hemisphere money laundering in Toronto and Vancouver. In the RCMP, you don't want to pursue a case that you admit could be connected to Chinese state activity.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's just completely consistent with my more recent story that said there's some people in Canadian and US government posts that believe that there's people up high in Canada's government that don't want certain cases pursued. And so, yeah, could it come back to people close to Justin Trudeau that could be involved in fundraising, could be involved in illegal casinos that the Markham York Regional Police have said are important for the funding of drug activity? Yeah, I do think so. And I do think the US government knows a lot more than I do.
I think they know a lot. I think they know more than even Canadian intelligence and our law enforcement agencies here in Canada know. I think, going back to this report, and people, this is a fantastic report. Go to thebureau.news and read it, because I was reading it again today because of just like, it's breathtaking, because the thing is I can sit here and speculate on this podcast all day. And Sam Cooper, you can bring me the facts and say, look, this is what I know to be true. And at the end of the day, you're an investigative reporter and you're reporting the facts, but will those facts ever be acted upon by anybody? Who knows, right? I mean, especially in this day and age where so much of what you uncovered is so bone chilling, but yet nothing happens. But reading this report, you're talking to current and former members of law enforcement on both sides of the border, and they're all saying the exact same thing, that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are deliberately missing the point. And that,
and followed up upon by Mayor Brad West, that decided to disclose more a few days after I broke that story.
Yeah. And that's the, like, it's like why are we still talking about Trudeau? Didn't this guy resign? Like, what are we doing? It just, that's what it feels like to me. It just feels like utter confusion, total chaos. And, we're in a situation where our closest ally, our closest trade partner, the country that we rely on for military protection, both in the Arctic and otherwise, has lost complete and total faith in us. And now we're in this position where we're, as I wrote, it seems like we're either waiting for China to step in and save us in exchange for what's left of our autonomy, or for Trump to put us out of our misery. Like,
it's a terrible situation. And like, don't get me wrong, people around the world, including Europe, Ukraine, people are nervous in Taiwan. I mean, the American government isn't being cuddly about this. There's a lot of things are being reshaped. Someone has decided that the threat of war with China is so real and so concerning that the world order needs to be reshaped, and America is going to reshape it while it can. Yeah. Because, we're talking years. We're not talking 5 years, 10 years. The US government, while it still has the edge, is reshaping and being incredibly transactional. As I've said, if you're Australia, you're a strong ally of the United States. United Kingdom, you're still an ally. New Zealand and Canada, functionally, you may not even be really an ally anymore. And they're saying, okay, pony up now for the military and start prosecuting what we know is wrong in your country, or you're on the outside. And that's where we are. And it hurts. It really hurts. But I think that's why you liked my talk with Mark Cahotis, my investor friend. That's what we're saying. That is the reality of the situation.
And I just think that we need to start getting real about this. Like there's a reason why, you and I are doing back-to-back episodes on this podcast. And for the next 2 months, I have nothing but Canadians booked in on this podcast. And this podcast, remember, most of my audience is in the United States. Like, for people listening, I'm risking losing most of my audience over the course of the next 2 months, because I feel that as commentators, as Sam, I'm not a journalist, but Sam and myself as a writer, off comes the jacket. We have a responsibility to try to save this thing. This is our home. And that's the reason why I'm doing this. Is I'm the thing I'm most angry about is that Justin Trudeau and the post-national Liberal Party have taken a giant shit in my living room. That's how I feel. And now I'm in this situation where I'm scrambling to try to save what's left of my carpet.
Everyone with some capacity to reach, people with information and say, look, okay, are we going to let the Liberal Party, which should be in the dustbin of history, do its tricks again and say, okay, everyone under 40 in Canada, you're a traitor if you're saying our country's broken. No. You probably got a good grasp on the truth that no one more than Justin Trudeau's government has broken our country and put us in the position where we are questioned by our strongest ally, who appears to be, not our ally anymore, unless we can fix ourselves very quickly. And is it even possible? No, we're pretty broken. So we need some good faith south of the border, and the Liberal Party isn't the one to deliver it. They're the worst ones.
That's right. And, I think about all that we stand to lose. And even just on a personal level, right? Like, Sam, it's no secret, you've dealt with frivolous lawsuits. You've taken a beating behind the scenes at certain points, and you're still going. And it's like, we don't have to do this. Like, Sam Cooper doesn't have to run the bureau. Sam Cooper, like I said, he could be sitting behind a laptop at Globe and Mail, punching away stories about, you know, a house fire in Oshawa or whatever, gives shit that nobody cares about. But here you are, right? And that, I just feel like, man, we are either in the closing stages of this British colonial experiment, or we are on the brink of something way bigger, better, and more, just more powerful than we could have ever imagined. And I'm hoping that it's the latter. I'm hoping that it's that you and I and thousands of other people across this country who are doing the exact same thing that we're doing are spearheading an effort that will lead Canada into a future where we're actually taken seriously on the global level.
Yeah, and adulthood. Like, as my, as Ambassador Harry Sang, Taiwan's top representative in Canada, told me in an interview, Canada, you could be a superpower. And I've been saying the same things. We've been making the wrong decisions. We've been tying ourselves in knots with our own, problems for 40, 50 years or more. I guess it probably does kind of accelerate with, the misguided romanticism of Pierre Trudeau, and his son has put the nail in the coffin. So yeah, we could, like my friend, my colleague Bob Mackin, great West Coast journalist, we were talking about it on a podcast a long time ago, and he said, this upcoming election, this is maybe 4 months ago when we thought we're going to see one soon, could be a great moment of national pride when we see the highest voting level totals we've seen in decades. And now it's got very complicated with Hurricane Donald and everything else. It's just like, wow, where do we go from here? But you're right. It's a pivotal. It could crumble, or it could be a time of renewal and growth.
And I really hope it's renewal and growth, because I think, it took Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party and just complete and total overwhelming criminality and just unmatched, unrestricted corruption for us to understand how fragile this thing of ours really is, and that we need to strengthen it, and we need to build a bulwark underneath and around this country, right?
Yeah, and that brings me to a thought. I mean, I know that both of us have a lot of friends in the United States, and both of us feel a sense of family, brotherhood, probably, but it's a message to those friends, like, the world actually is stronger with a strong Canada that's a strong ally with the United States. So the United States doesn't have to be unilateral in, when it has to take some tough choices around the world. Yeah. You want strong allies together, right? That's what it takes to turn back the greatest threat in our lifetime, which is approaching us in a year or two, right? Yeah. It'll be better if we have a strong Canada with the leader of the free world, the United States. And it could happen if we all start making some deeper and more, well-considered choices, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. We just have to stop this foolishness of pretending that these problems aren't real, or that Sam Cooper is a conspiracy theorist, or that, because I'm on this team that I'm going to casually ignore the things that I see happening in front of my face, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And, so that brings me to the next, I guess this can be our closing topic. I want to talk about Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre and this upcoming election, because, Pierre Poilievre gave his big Canada First rally, which is, I wish he would just stop with the slogans, just stop it. The whole Canada First thing, you're clearly trying to ride Trump's coattails on his America First campaign. And, maybe it works. I see the connection there, and hopefully people draw the connection themselves, because, from what we've seen in the United States with this Trump term, even though it's only a month and a half old, it's already, just
feels like a year already.
Yeah, I know. It's already brought just incredible change. So maybe maybe we will see something similar with Pierre Poilievre. But I listened to his full speech, and I just feel like he's taking the bait, like he's falling for the tricks, because there's no question in my mind that the Liberal Party, once Mark Carney is elected leader, which, let's be honest, Ruby Dalla, I love you, but it ain't happening. Once he's elected leader, they're going to try to turn this election, the main election issue, into an economy issue and economics, right? Because that's where he's strongest.
Economics and, fighting the bad guys south of the border, and that they've already done very, very well with that. And that's exactly why Poilievre had to pivot and sort of tap into that. Oh, hey, I'm here too. I'll defend the country against the bad guy. And so the Conservatives were just thrown for a loop with that visceral, obviously some of it justified response. Like, there's no way that the average Canadian should be, shouldering the disrespect, which probably rightly is aimed at the Liberal government and our Prime Minister, who I remember, I recounted in a podcast just the other day. Who can forget the infantile comment of Justin Trudeau to Stephen Harper, talking about Stephen Harper wants to whip out his F-35, right? When, look at where we are now, when we don't have a military, and just like this whole, where we are now is because Justin Trudeau has accelerated a decline, right? Yeah. And so, Canadians, we're in a position where we have to shoulder that debasement which our government has put upon us, right? And so that caused a lot of people that were probably, when the pollster rang them up, they were saying, yeah, I think it's time for change. And now with this Team Canada complete scam, right? It threw a whole new element into this election if it happens.
But the thing I don't understand is Pierre Poilievre is a smart guy, right? I mean, he's an establishment guy, so he's going to play by the establishment rules. But I just don't understand how he doesn't see what's happening. I don't understand how there's nobody on his team who said, listen, here's what we're going to do. Because it's a layup. It's a political layup, right? Trump is pointing out a series of problems, fentanyl, borders, which we all know is alluding to China. Why doesn't Poilievre just address them directly? Say, look, we have a ton of problems and all of them are caused by the Liberal Party, right? He could easily do that.
I just think the answer to that is we don't all know that China is lurking under this. As my friend Mark Cahotis says, maybe about 10% of Canadians fully get, not to be, self-congratulatory, fully, clearly get what we're talking about today, that China is underlying this all, that Canada's refusal to counter China is underlying this all, that Trudeau's failure to counter China and Trudeau's, in fact, choice to benefit from China's interference is a lot of what's going on here. Probably, I don't know, we've already seen a lot of baby boomers are reverting. If they were even considering Poilievre, they've reverted back to what they know and trust. That is, they have a home and Canada's under attack. So I do think that Poilievre surely was getting advice. I even read from some columnists that some of them, are reasonable people, that they kind of had to put a stop to the slide that was happening. And so we'll see. But I get what you're saying, that, I mean, it reverted to very simplistic messaging, which reflects what the Liberals are doing.
Yeah. And it's like, see, if there's anybody that could pull it off, it's Poilievre. And what I mean is, by stepping forward and saying, okay, listen, guys, I'm going to talk to you all like adults, because Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, and the Liberal Party insist on talking to you like infants. But I'm going to explain this to you like adults. Here's what's happening. And for him to break down exactly what's going on. Now, maybe he isn't, because there are members of his party who are implicated in this as well. And I have a sneaking suspicion that may be the case, right?
There is that. And there's also, I mean, he is You're right. When he's in a groove, when he's talking to a guy outside a grocery store saying, I can't even put, good cereal on the table for my children anymore. And
Yeah.
he spoke to that person heart to heart, he can resonate. But as I know from the former leader, Aaron O'Toole, when Aaron O'Toole was messaging very firmly and righteously about China's interference, there were forces within his party that were telling him to dial it back. So I'm sure the very same forces are very kind of instrumental on Poilievre now that they've seen his message start to, not resonate. And that's what's going on around him.
Yeah, I just wish that there was somebody strong enough to flip the board and say, I'm not playing the game anymore. Here's what we're doing. Look, there's a reason why Trump was so successful in his last 3 campaigns, right? And it was because he did exactly that. He went against the Republican orthodoxy and talked about things that they were too afraid to address, right? He took the risks. He addressed the conspiracy theories, which is code for things that are true, but everybody wants to pretend aren't. And he was successful. You know why? Because number one, the internet exists, right? So we all have access to the information that's telling us exactly what's happening, right? Number two, we all have an intuitive sense that something is deeply wrong. So what we're looking for is somebody who can tell us what's happening, what's going on, break it down for us. There's a reason why this podcast is as successful as it is. There's a reason why Sam Cooper, every time you and I talk to each other, it takes off. You know why? Because people are looking for answers. And so give us a populist outsider, not Mark Carney. He's not an outsider. I'm talking about a real outsider who's going to step forward and say, okay, look, you guys want to know what's up? Here's what's up. And this is how we're going to fix it. And it's going to suck and it's going to hurt, but we're going to get it done. And I just don't understand why he can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you. And I think they just got so thrown for a loop by the way that a deep fear was tapped into Canadians, with this 51st state rhetoric and everything that's going on, that just changed the whole game. And they were scrambling for, let's get back on a solid ground again. And who knows? I mean, it brings up the point. I know that we're almost out of time for both of us today, but I just reported 2 stories today that someone called Democracy Watch has dug back into RCMP investigative files of the SNC-Lavalin investigation, if you remember that ancient history. And, what's relevant to me is a lot of people are looking at Mark Carney, but they don't know the very same people surrounding Justin Trudeau, so Katie Telford, Gerald Butts, that were subject of RCMP, basically a non-investigation, but it's known that these people, for Liberal election chances, pressured Jody Wilson-Raybould and her staff to back off on a prosecution, or rather, they tried to get them to intervene to let a powerful Quebec company that's supportive of Justin Trudeau and his government off the hook. And so this case is being brought back to the surface by Democracy Watch. And you talked about what can people like us do to, be part of this potential, failure of Canada or a renewal election. And I think it's great that case is coming back to light. And I'll add this, a really interesting RCMP transcript talks about how Jody Wilson-Raybould's staff was aware of a plan that the Trudeau government was going to bring out, quote, eminent Canadians to explain why letting off this powerhouse Quebec company was the right thing. And they were so eminent that no one, including the opposition parties, could question, their credibility. And I thought, where have I heard that before? Eminent Canadian, David Johnston.
Yeah.
Eminent Canadian, Justice Ogue. So There's a playbook here. I know it probably about as well as anyone. There's a playbook when something bad surfaces about Justin Trudeau and his party. They've got a playbook that's going to powerful judges and lawyers that no one is supposed to question. And that's what they do.
So to close here, because I wanted to go into this, but we're running out of time. So maybe we'll go deeper on the next episode. But are Gerald Butts and Katie Telford the main connections between Mark Carney and these shadowy figures in the distance who seem to also donate to the Trudeau Foundation and the Liberal Party? Or does Mark Carney have direct connections to them as well?
Are you talking about in terms of Chinese threat networks or?
Yes.
That's a great question. I mean, what I know very solidly is that the Chinese interference networks grew out of the Ontario legislature very clearly, migrated with Katie Telford, Gerald Butts, Mary Ng, and others to Ottawa. So this is an Ontario-based thing with a corporate Quebec side. And my impression is that Mark Carney would be very much closer to that rarefied corporate Quebec side and legal side that is a very powerful part of the, let's say, increasing trade with China, philosophy that I say underlies the more gritty aspects of organized criminals showing up at fundraisers with Justin Trudeau. And so one little data point, since you asked, it came to me that as Bank of England governor, Mark Carney had increased the dealings of, England's financial system with the Bank of China. And documents explained that he felt, or the government of the day felt this would be supportive of multilateral trade and development deals involving England and China. So I think that points back again to the same type of politician that would be very supportive of free trade with China, Belt and Road projects, and sort of the forces that are occurring in Europe right now as the United States appears ready to pull back. Those forces of China, which are investment, banks, trade, are trying to fill the gap. So Mark Carney he's just at that highest level of kind of facilitating that pro-China trade lobby.
Oh, let's leave it there. See, I've been kind of quietly drawing a line myself, and I think this Linda's son, Katie Hochul, or Kathy, I can't remember, the governor of New York.
New York, yeah.
Yeah, she had a CCP agent right up close to her, one of her aides, right? And New York also happens to be Donald Trump's home state. And I think that, as dumb as it seems, I think that might be what rang alarm bells and what caused him to pay more attention to what his intelligence agencies are telling him, and what caused him to set his focus on Trudeau and Canada. And the thing that is hyper scary is that, as you just outlined, Mark Carney is leagues above Trudeau. And that, let's make no bones about it, we know Mark Carney is going to be the next Liberal leader, which means he's going to become our default prime minister until we have an election. Yeah. And that is not good for us.
That's right? A huge concern. It's it can't be covered enough. It's just a point of how do you need concrete issues to make it new and keep focusing on it. Yeah. But it's a huge concern.
And so, in closing, I will say this. I talked about Pierre Poilievre today because I've had a few of his people reach out to me and let me know that they watched the podcast. And so I'll make this appeal now. Pierre Poilievre, if you'd like to talk to me on this podcast, I'm more than happy to do so. I want to discuss these issues with you, though. I'm not going to dance. I'm not going to do your dance. We're not going to talk politics and all the safe, glossed over bullshit. We're not going to talk slogans or anything. We're going to talk about this because I think this is the most important issue of the day.
Ask him if Prime Minister, will he hire Brad West as fentanyl czar? Brad West that is ready to get right into Canada's justice system, ready to look at suspected compromised politicians. If Pierre Poilievre answered yes to that, that should be the next Prime Minister.
And I'll say Jason James and Sam Cooper are not running on any political ticket, but our slogan is grow up.
Yeah.
That's what we're here to
grow up, or the state falls away.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Sam Cooper, my brother, it is always a pleasure, man. I'm gonna let you get some rest. You're obviously fighting a cold. I am too, so we're both hanging by a thread here. Sam, tell everybody where they can find you.
Go straight to the bureau.news, which is, as we've talked about, we'll be reporting more on U.S. domestic issues, and is in a good growth phase with over 20,000 non-paying subscribers right now. So,
come on, man.
Yeah.
Upgrade that subscription, folks. Upgrade that.
Money,
man. Get that paid subscription so Sam can wear a t-shirt in his house and get the heat going over there.
Cold in Ottawa. I'm right by a window there.
Also, make sure you follow Sam on X, Scooper Cooper. Sam, dude, I am so happy to see your success, brother. Every time I go on the internet, like I said, I'm seeing your face and I'm just like, fuck. I'm so happy to see it because honestly, man, I mean, out of everybody in this country, you're the only one with any credibility saying anything, and that's scary. But, and, Gary Clement and Bob Mackin and others as well. But, you're the one, you're the lone warrior out there swinging his sword. And, dude, it's so awesome, man, to podcasts that I listen to talking about Sam Cooper's reporting. I'm really excited for you for the future, my brother. And really excited that I grabbed you before all this happened, because I feel like you're kind of obligated to talk to me now.
I'm staying busy, put it that way. But great talking always.
All right, man. Everybody sign up, thebureau.news, sign up as a paid subscriber. There's lots and lots of great stuff on there. And all of this stuff that we talk about on the podcast is on the Bureau, and it's way more detail. And make sure you follow Sam on X at Scooper Cooper. I am a habitual refresher of his feed, and you will be too if you follow him. Sam, let's reconvene in a few weeks.
Yep.
All right, my brother. Well, until then, get some rest, take that nap, and we'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye.